We have already discussed Talt Hall's version of his feud against Claib Jones. Now we have Claib's version of the events. When we last left Claib, he had established Fort Jones in Floyd County, Kentucky, near Beech Mountain. However, Claib was not finished moving around and would soon have troubles beginning with Talt Hall that would escalate. While there is speculation as to why and how the feud between the two men actually did get started, for Claib it started as simply as protecting someone who came to him for help. We do see small cameos of Bad John Wright in this section of the story, but his part of the feud, along with the sheriff of Letcher County, will be in full swing before the dust settles over this part of the Appalachian Mountains. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine! Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up the time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. The first insult in the Jones-Hall-Wright feud. While still living in Floyd County at Jones Fort, Claib was living a life of hunting and semi-peace and quiet. He had trouble, but it was nothing really major. However, this would all soon change. According to Jones, this would be the event that would start the hard feelings between himself and Hall and Wright. This would escalate with further events. A young man named Fultz had killed a man during the Carter County War or Holbrook-Underwood feud. He had a $700 reward for his capture and arrest to face charges for this murder. Fultz had made his way to Jones Fort to ask for protection from the law. Claib agreed to help him and hid him in the place where he thought that no one could find the young man. The next day, United States Marshal Tom Prater and a posse of men came knocking at Jones Fort. Claib was in the bed but told the men to come on in. Prater asked Jones where the young man was, and Claib answered that he was hidden and that, quote, "We're eating my own chickens and then no man could get him," unquote. Prater flew mad at Jones, but Jones reached under his pillow and grabbed his pistol and aimed it at Prater. He also reached across and grabbed his old Champy gun and drew it near himself. Needless to say, Prater and his posse left the cabin alone after that point. A few days later, Talt Hall, Black Hawk Sizemore, and old John Wright came after Fultz. The same words were exchanged. However, Claib did offer, even if the group of men gave him $50 to bring Fultz out into the yard, that they still would not be able to arrest him. This was a huge insult to Wright, Hall, and Sizemore. The men left the cabin very angry. The second insult in the Jones-Hall-Wright feud. Claib talks about moving to Knott County to the head of Beaver Creek close to where he was born. He rented a farm for 2 growing seasons from Ben Hall, who was a merchant. One day, while leaving the store, Jones met up with Talt Hall and Bill Bates. They asked Jones to join their clan. They told Claib that under their gang that he would no longer have to worry, that old John Wright was their captain, and that he would not let any of his men suffer under the law. Jones let them know that he was no longer in any trouble with the law and that he wished to remain so. That for him the answer was no. Hall and Bates did not take too kindly to this answer and was mad at Jones for the refusal. Death of Frank Salyers. Once again we hear the name of Frank Salyers. This is Jones' eyewitness testimony as to what happened to Salyers that fateful day. Frank Salyers lived on Beaver Creek 1 mile from Jones. He had a lewd wife who had a loose reputation. Talt Hall stayed at Salyers' home most of his time when he was out on a raid. It didn't take long for Salyers to catch on to what his wife and Hall were doing together. He had enough and he left for Wise County, Virginia. Salyers stayed there for a while, and on his way back to Kentucky he stayed several days with John Wright at his home on Elkhorn Creek near Pound Gap, in what is now known as Jenkins, Kentucky. Billy Hall, who was the brother of Talt Hall, was also staying with Wright, and came on to Beaver Creek to tell his brother where Salyers was, and that in a few days he would be home again. In the meantime, Jones had been clearing some land for planting and needed to put up some fencing. He went around looking for hired hands to help him with the project. On his way back home, Jones witnessed Hall and Willie Bates walking with Salyers behind a corn crib. Hall was walking in front of Salyers, and Bates was walking behind him with his hand on the lock of his gun. Jones claims that it was at this point that he stepped up to Hall and begged for Salyers' life. Hall replied that he would not have killed Salyers then, but that he was in this world for a short time. Claib saw that this was a great time to get away from the men and took off for home, because he knew if Salyers was to die right then and there, that he would also be killed for witnessing the act. Later that evening, Salyers was shot and killed as he stepped out onto the steps of his house by some men who were standing in the corner of his house. Bill Bates was the major, Bill Hawk Sizemore was the constable, and Tommy Talton was the judge, and whatever Tommy said was the law. The next day an inquest for the death of Salyers was held. The neighbors and Jones were expected to attend because it was summoned by Sizemore. The inquest ended with a ruling that Salyers had been killed by some unknown person for some unknown reason. However, proof was given at the inquest that about dark that evening, Talt had sent George Johnson and Willie Bates, two of his lieutenants, away, even though that there was a big snow on the ground. Hall told Salyers to step out to see if it was not raining. Salyers stepped out onto the porch and said, quote, "Frank, it is sure enough raining," unquote. And then Salyers was shot. Hall ran upstairs and fired the signal gun from the loft to let everyone know that Salyers was dead. The funeral. The next day, Jones goes to the Salyers' home to find Hall and Salyers' widow laying across the bed. The couple got up, and the woman was sitting on Hall's lap at the hearth as Jones and Bill Cook dressed Salyers for his funeral. Willie Bates came into the house and drew his gun on Claib, only to have it caught by Sizemore. Jones sat on the bed, and Bates sat next to him with his gun cocked on his shoulder. Jones moved closer to Bates to catch his gun in case he tried to shoot him. Jones states that if the men were not at the front door watching him, that he would have taken Bates' gun and finished him off. But, as it was, Claib helped to take hold of the coffin and carry out the corpse to his grave. On the way to where they were going to bury Salyers, which was not far from Claib's home, he slipped away from the crowd and made a beeline straight for his house. He looked out of a window, and there was Hall on Salyers' horse with the widow right behind him. Claib states that he had lent his bear gun to someone at that time, but he wished that he had it so that he could have ended the whole farce. But, as it was, Jones watched as the jolly party made their way to Bill Bates's fort, while Hall was playing Sour Mountain on his fiddle. At this point, Claib was afraid to stay at his house, so he and his family went to stay with Ben Hall at his home. The next day, one of Talt Hall's spies came to the store and invited Jones and Ben Hall to go with him up the creek. Fearing that this was a planned ambush, Jones and Ben Hall took action. Ben Hall and his wife took his horse and went 5 miles to the home of Miles Hall. Claib Jones took a different path through the woods and met Ben Hall there. Jones' wife would go back home and stay there until Jones sent word to her for her next move. Forged letter and trouble. When Claib Jones' wife had reached the home, she found that the roof had been torn off of the smokehouse and all of the meat was stolen. Also, the meal barrel had been turned over, as well as a huge mess had been left around the house. The same day that Salyers was buried, George Johnson and Willie Bates gave false testimony that they found a letter written by Ben Hall's wife that Claib had been hired by Ben Hall to kill Salyers. With everything mounting against them, Hall and Jones felt that they needed to leave the area immediately. Just as Ben Hall was fixing to leave for safety, Big John Hall alerted everyone that Talt Hall, John Wright, and several others were 1/2 a mile away hiding in the forks of the creek, Unarmed Jones took to the woods and fled to Sherwood Osborne's and got a .45 gun off of him for protection. Claib goes for help. Ben Hall's father, Captain Bolin Hall, was at Mount Sterling at the time taking care of his stock. He came back to the country and gathered Ben, his wife, and Jones's wife to take back with him. Claib had went through the mountains and made it to Hindman, the county seat of Knott County. While there, Jones took out warrants for the parties who had murdered Salyers. However, the sheriff nor any of the county officials were willing to take up the warrants against Talt and his band of outlaws. Jones then went to Dick Vance for help in the matter. We will leave this section of the feud with Jones going to Dick Vance, as he will speak about the attempted murder of Vance and the murder of John Adams of Letcher County. What happens to Vance and Lindell Higgins that causes the feud to escalate further. We will also discuss how the feud between Hall and Jones escalates to the point that each party is out for the death of the other. Letcher County is now ready to fall into chaos as the three factions are about to meet in Elkhorn Creek. A special thank you. We wish again to thank those who have helped us gather information about the people in this series. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living could not do the amount of research and storytelling that we do without the help of some great historians and friends. We have a special list today of people that we wish to thank. A special thank you goes out to Anthony Blair and Vicki McPeaks Tackett. Another very special thank you goes to Charlotte Hicks Cottle for her help about the Jones family. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notifications button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.